Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 421. The Ocean. Travel during the night was no problem for the group as most, like Seth, had a way to see in the dark. On the journey, they talked a little more about the dangers of exposure to the sun. Ahmed was even providing the hero and Rich with a talisman each to resist the sun. He told them the horror stories of villagers and refugees that had been exposed to the sun during long journeys. It did not end with heat strokes or dehydration. There would often be terrible sunburns that resulted in people's skin peeling off in big bloody patches. When it was not that they would show similar symptoms to those cursed by the blood sun after extended exposure to sunlight. It made sure that everyone dropped the idea of traveling through the day, even the hero. Even though they did not feel any terrible effects now, probably thanks to their level, none of them wanted to risk any permanent illnesses on this journey. A god's curse was no joke. The landscape changed as their journey led them closer to the ocean. Slowly, more shrubs and trees appeared in the wasteland. Just as dried up as the grasslands they came from. Everything looked gnarly and bleached from the sun. They followed an old, dusty road, lined by this dead vegetation. "We have to be careful from here on," Ahmed warned them. The reason became clear before anyone could ask when a bush suddenly attacked Yvette. The dry white twigs swiped at her like claws. She jumped back in shock, with a few red welts and cuts on her arm. In a fit of anger, she struck the shrub stem and it completely stopped moving. Almost as if it was petrified. Ahmed wiped his sweat from heat and embarrassment. "I should have explained quicker. The plants are just as cursed as the creatures. What didn't die, turned under the power of the blood sun. At least, they are stuck where they grew. As long as we are careful and keep our distance, there is no problem." Yvette, the saintess, gave him a glare but couldn't keep the anger up for long. Her expression soon returned to its tranquil state and Ahmed heaved a sigh. They kept moving, making sure to stay away from the path's edge. They had already traveled some distance, and nobody saw the bush the saintess had struck crumble into irregular rubble like pieces of glass. After a stretch of shrubbery, the road led through a vast forest. The coastal region must have once been covered in a lush forest, now only the dry and dreadful carcasses were left. The empty branches reaching to the starry sky alone were enough to give him an oppressive feeling. On top came the knowledge that they were technically surrounded by enemies, not counting the beasts lurking in the darkness between the trees. Passing through didn't feel good, but it was definitely not a place any of them wanted to spend the day at. "How long until we reach Baram?" the hero asked Ahmed impatiently. "It should come into view in the morning, but we should not get too close. The abandoned cities are teeming with monsters. It's better to cut through the fields and directly enter the coast road." This was the route Ahmed had suggested. They couldn't take the direct way between Ahaz and the dungeon, because of the mountains and forest in between. That was why they aimed for Baram, using the road in that direction, and then turn in the direction of Ahaz once they reached the shore. The knight explained that there were fewer abominations along the shore, because the sea weakened them, even during the day. That road along the shore was, therefore, safer than any other. Most had spoken in favor of this. They didn't know what really lurked in the wilderness. It was better to evade unneeded risks. Of course, only the hero had wanted to take the shortest route to help the people as soon as possible. The hateful sun was already rising in front of them, at the horizon. The thick forest had made way for dry fields, laying idly without anybody to cultivate them. Outlines by the brightening morning, they could see the silhouette of a town down the street, close to the ocean. Seth's heart jumped a little and it seemed he was not the only one. It was not often that he had the chance to see the ocean with his own eyes. It was a lot different from seeing it on the TV or the internet. "I want to visit the shore," Ellie mumbled with sparkling eyes. "Me too," mumbled Elsa unexpectedly. "I also wouldn't mind," Rich agreed. Everyone shared their sentiment in general. Ahmed was a little confused about their sudden reaction. "Areem. It might not be the best idea to get too close to the ocean," Ahmed stammered awkwardly. "Why not?" Marcel asked wondering. "It's true the abominations are weaker to the ocean, but it doesn't mean there are none. Especially the things in the ocean." With some pauses and stuttering, Ahmed talked about the first time they had traveled to visit the catacombs, after hearing they could provide shelter. They had heard from refugees that there were fewer monsters close to the sea and decided to travel along the beach at the shore. In the beginning, everything was as expected. "We only met lone abominations until a sea creature suddenly charged out from the water. Its wide jaws with human-like teeth formed a natural sneer as it snatched 5 people and their horses at once. The unnatural bulging eyes didn't even look at us as the beast started thrashing around and trying to catch more of us. The uncanny, lipless smile opened, and bundles of tentacles sprouted forth to catch men and horses. True terror was visible from the knight's expression. It took a while for him to continue speaking. That was not the only attack, and there were other beasts. After losing half our people at the sea, we rather took up the fight with the abominations on land. Everyone was silent for a moment. Just a small visit won't hurt, right? Ellie broke the silence. She really wanted to visit the sea. Ellie, you heard that it's dangerous. And we don't have time for something like that. We have to get to Ahaz. The hero turned her down. Seth. I want to go to the beach. Ellie whined. You heard our brave leader. Don't worry, I'm sure we will have enough time to marvel at the wonders of the ocean later on. The blacksmith consoled her. After all, it was assured they would have to find a way to cross the sea. If what Ahmed described was true, it might be harder than expected to travel this world's waters. Ahmed was visibly glad that they did not insist on getting closer to the sea. The road along the coast led past a few empty fisher villages, but they kept away at Ahmed's urging. As the days went by and time got closer to the blood sun, the abominations they met during the day became noticeably stronger. They blazed through everything, except for bigger groups that took up more of their time. Seth started getting suspicious of Ahmed. There was something he was not telling them. Even if the fishing villages were teeming with monsters or abominations, they were no problem to them. What was the night hiding from them? It happened when they were just 2 days away from Ahaz. In the once more temperate climate and closer to the big city, there were more villages and towns surrounded by vast fields. Suddenly a roar made them halt in their tracks. Ding! You have witnessed the horror of field boss modeled abomination. Experience gained. Ding! Your skill Fear Resistance Leave 8 had become Fear Resistance Leave 9. How long had it been since his fear resistance even had a reason to gain proficiency? Now it directly leveled up. The beast before them was more than just some cursed or mutated creature. It was a terrifying amalgamation of molten monsters. Charging at them from a nearby berg was a 6 or 7 meter tall humanoid. From the single hollow eye cavity visible on the from molten flesh exposed skull, they could guess that the base was once a cyclops. However, where its ribcage was supposed to be, opened a giant maw as if the head of another beast was fused into its torso. The rest of its skin was fused with squirming humanoid and animal limbs and bodies as if it absorbed everything that came too close to its once molten skin, that had now hardened into the black armored tumors they already knew from other beasts. It was disgusting and horrifying to look at it, to the point that the sight alone had a psychological effect on its victims. Maybe the most concerning part was that it still had the level of intelligence to use a huge club as a weapon. It kept dragging it over the ground as it ran in their direction. What is that? Brock, the mighty monk, screeched in a voice several octaves higher than usual. Chapter 422. Muddled Abomination. Shit, I didn't think one would still be left this close to the city. Ahmed cursed and the party hurried to get into formation, to stop the giant beast's rush. Seth glared at the knight. So he was right that their guide had kept a secret from them. Unfortunately, there was no time to sort out the knight's secretiveness. With practiced routine, the hero charged in the front to meet the first attack and set up their line of battle. No matter how little he liked Ben Harker, Seth had to admit that he possessed a terrifying strength. The man who kept 5 dungeon bosses and an army of elite monsters at bay didn't have to exert himself to face the common abominations or monsters. Marcel, Brock, Cade, and Ellie followed him as melee vanguards. The standard tactic was to juggle the beast's attention between them, to minimize the burden. Trusting their established vanguard, everyone else started to chant spells or cast buffs. Seth had just lifted his demonic lyre to sing a strengthening song when the unthinkable happened. The hero met the terrifying beast's charge and was pushed back. The epic sword met the haphazardly swung club in the air and the hero was slung into the air. Surprised, the other 4 were easily pushed away and the vomit-inducing monster freely charged at the rear guard. Things changed in an instant, as everyone suddenly turned serious. Leisure casts were instantly completed and suddenly the abomination was met by a wall of magic bombardment, halting it in its tracks. A thick cloud of mist covered its body, blinding the myriad eyes present on the body. Icicles jutted out from the mist, having pierced the beast and turning it into a porcupine. Its overall movements had suddenly slowed, looking like it was caught in slow motion. Only Seth didn't make some super powerful instant move. The blacksmith simply did not have one in his role as a bard. It was the drawback of a song, it had to be sung correctly and couldn't be shortened. Muddled Abomination Leave 82. Status effects: Enraged, Stagnation, Freezing, Blind. Checking the beast with observation, despite the number of status effects, it could be seen that it had taken almost no damage from this attack. The vanguard had recovered from the shock and started showering the field boss with attacks. However, even when the disheveled hero finally returned to the battle, they had a hard time cutting away at the beast's Jinamao's health and armor. On the other hand, it was obvious that they were still holding back, as no one in the party sustained any injuries either. With their mediocre teamwork, it would take ages to defeat the boss. It was then that Seth saw a chance. Krana. The audience was appalled by the appearance of the monster that had suddenly appeared. They already knew similar beasts from other teams, but this one was on another level of ugly. They would appear in regions with a high population of life and were the result of cursed creatures fusing under the blood sun. Their power would grow exponentially with the number of individuals absorbed. To everyone's disappointment, what started in a spectacular fashion had quickly turned into a war of attrition. They wanted what every audience craved, a flashy, exciting fight that got their blood pumping. Many were about to switch to another team, or a show on other channels when foreign music filled the battlefield. The bard, that had been playing ordinary songs, despite the intriguing instrument in his hand, suddenly changed gears. Completely. A full and complex set of sounds, one would not expect from the instrument, originated from the lyre. Accompanying the complex music was a deep demonic voice. Seductively, it found its way into the ears of the listening. Few knew the language, but all understand the meaning. The collision of worlds and the struggle for control. The eyes were bound to the screens as they witnessed the battle changing. The attacks became quicker, the timing became better. Suddenly the team members worked in tandem. Like a clockwork, they started moving in an almost choreographed fashion. Magic created openings to be exploited. Attacks were stacked and status effects timed. As everyone was enveloped in the dark music, their blood pumping and their head filled with baseless zeal for action, the audience wanted to jump off their seats, but the team moved as if controlled by a sinister puppeteer. Their faces expressionless, their moves tied to the timing of the tune, the speed of the battle increased. Blood spurted, wounds accumulated. Finally, the giant field boss was cut down by a team play of frightening precision. All of it without marginally increasing the members' power or revealing their secrets. Only after the minced colossus finally collapsed and the music ended, signs of emotion returned to the members of the Erdhand team. It was similar for the audience, who had only heard a recording. It was as if they had left a trance when the music finally stopped. Their hearts palpitated from the surge of excitement they had just experienced. The topic quickly attracted a lot of attention and many people turned to look up the bard who had suddenly shown a glimpse of his scary musical prowess. To Sean's great respite, the Krana 5 channel and its services experienced a surge of popularity. The matter of a team suddenly vanishing mysteriously faded out of the public's attention. Kavati Koinen. Seth was a little out of breath and his throat was sore. His mana was also mostly depleted. Otherwise, he was quite happy with the outcome of the song. As one of the few songs that only needed mana as a cost to channel the power of a demon, its effects were great. What happened? The team members stammered, still confused by the sudden end of the battle. Only the mist demon was looking at Seth with sparkling eyes. He was a demonic bard, was written all over Misto's face. That was your music, right? The hero asked. No need to thank me. I know how important time is to you. Seth said happily, completely ignoring the big but that was written on the hero's face. Other faces had mostly confusion and relief written on them. The hero let the matter rest, as did everyone else. Because, unlike how it looked from the outside, Seth had not suddenly taken control of them and turned them into a group of puppets dancing to his tunes. It was clear to them from the very beginning, that they could have chosen to resist and nothing would have happened if they had done so. They had been more or less conscious the whole time and could have stopped. Still, the weird experience left them stumped and they needed some time to cope with what happened. If nobody minds, I will help myself to the corpse, Seth said matter-of-factly and went ahead to bag the minced body like he had done with the others before. The blacksmith had an easy time coming to an agreement with the others since nobody had any interest in the bodies of the abominations. It's a shame I couldn't get a taste of that one when it was alive. Puffles lamented. After gaining control of the recorder, Seth had made sure to feed Puffles with the disgusting corpses he collected throughout their journey. According to the nightmare centipede, they were very delish and of high nutritional value to him. Seth could not help but shiver, every time the advisor brought up the topic. He exclaimed in surprise when he saw what was floating above the field boss's body. It had given surprisingly little experience for a boss of its level and difficulty. Was this the reason? Above the body floated a mass of disjointed souls. On one hand, they looked disconnected, but they all belonged to the same soul under appraisal. It was very weird and slightly disturbing. This indicated that the sun's curse could even affect the soul of the victim. Soul clutter, massive, common, crafting material. A mass of haphazardly fused and cross-contaminated souls. Unstable connections and chaotic memory contaminations make it prone to collapse on its own. A low-quality material that requires a lot of time and expertise and refinement to be worked with. Despite being massive, it was no good material. The less than badly fused souls originally varied in affinities and quality, but simply became a muddled mess in this way. Instead of wasting a lot of time on it, the blacksmith had a better idea. He simply fed it to Karen's obel. You knew about this, the hero, who had gotten over his qualms, braked at Ahmed. It was time to deal with the night. Why didn't you tell us? Was this the reason you kept us away from settlements? Seth interjected. From its appearance alone, it was not hard to guess how such a creature would be born. Villages that had a sizable population would have had a high chance to spawn a beast like this during the start of this apocalypse. I thought you might flee once you face one of the amalgamations. Amalgamations. It's what we call these abominations. They are created from the fusion of several different monsters and humans under the blood sun. They are extremely strong compared to the level displayed. Ahmed. I thought you trusted me. How could you doubt me like that? The hero was hurt by this blatant lack of trust. I'm sorry was all Ahmed could say. He didn't dare to come up with some flimsy excuse and simply apologized. Are you two done? Can we leave now? Seth asked after bagging the corpse. Chapter 423. Ahas. The following battles became harder on the team as more of these beasts appeared. Nonetheless, after having experienced the perfectly orchestrated team play, they became a lot better overall, which took a lot of pressure off of Seth's throat. What stayed true was that the beast gave disproportionate less experience compared to their strength. Seth managed to barely fill up his experience gauge and reach level 61. As they got closer to their destination, thick clouds appeared on the horizon. Only at the sight of this wall of dark clouds, did they realize their blatant absence up until now. The intensity of the sun let up as they entered the slightly cloudy landscape. HOH? Is that the work of a demon? Misto wondered at the sight. Ah, yes. The Lord has made a deal with a demon to cover the skies above the city in thick clouds that protect the city from the curse. Ahmed explained. You made a deal with the devil, the hero voiced his concerns. People outside Delta did not have much interaction with demons, and the short time with Misto and the team had not helped Ben to let go of his prejudices. Do not worry. Lord Culus is a trustworthy person. His cloud formation has really saved our people. With the heaven covered in clouds, they started traveling through the day and could soon see Ahas. The sky above the city was inky black and its outlines were hard to see without night vision. The city plunged into darkness, was surrounded by a huge wall. The wall was massive but in a state of disrepair. They could see scaffolding and dozens of workers frantically trying to fix the huge gauges and breaks in the fortifications. Hundreds more were seen in the moat lugging away and burning the bodies of abominations. As they got closer, they saw the hundreds of black columns of smoke rising into the sky, joining the dark clouds. The area was marred with craters and signs of battle. Ahmed's face fell upon seeing the amount of damage, but he hurriedly hid it from the party. It seemed that the last blood sun was worse than the night expected. It was day, but only the bare minimum of ambient light illuminated the city in the dim twilight. If somebody had seen the knight's shocked face, they kept it to themselves. Seth held his nose as the stench of burning and rotting flesh hit them, as did most of the others. The workers wore dirty rags on their faces, but Seth was unsure whether those really helped cope with the abysmal smell. The murky water of the moat gave off an even more putrid stench when they followed Ahmed across the drawbridge. Looking down, the blacksmith saw that the moat was still filled with many rotting corpses. He almost threw up and added his own stomach contents to the mix. Workers used boat hooks to catch and pull out the decomposing bodies. I have no interest in those. The advisor suddenly declared. Was he supposed to feel relieved or concerned because the centipede thought he was thinking of collecting those things? Ahmed greeted the guard at the gate. These are important guests that wish to talk with Lord Haz, he explained their presence before they were let in. The city beyond the giant wall was in shambles. The terrible stench was slightly alleviated by the fresh breeze from the sea. Of the houses closest to the wall, only skeletons were left. When the merchant asked interestedly, Ahmed explained that many houses had been decommissioned and scavenged to repair and reinforce the wall. Ordinary civilians could hardly resist the sun at this point. It was impossible to send people to quarry for materials. They had to manage with what they could reach within the cover of the clouds. "What are you doing about food?" the merchant asked, seeing the malnourished people huddle in their homes, or what was left of them. It was like a siege, but the enemy army was the sun itself. "When I left, we still had enough rations in store for 2 months. In the beginning, we could still fish in the shallow waters close to the coast, but the sea has become too dangerous in the meantime. I heard the court mages were working on artificial farms. If they did not succeed, things might become dire." The knight answered honestly. The merchant fell in brooding silence. "Ahmed, do you think we could also meet Lord Culus?" Misto asked. The demon had been staring into the sky in fascination, ever since they entered the city. "He will probably be there, once we meet the Lord," Ahmed answered as age brought them to the city lord's palace. The stately mansion had been spared from material scavenging so far. A good number of guards made sure nobody trespassed. Many were occupied with holding back the starving mass of people who came to ask for more rations. It was only thanks to Ahmed that they were led into the mansion peacefully where they could finally meet Lord Haz. There were a few reasons they needed to talk with this noble, aside from the hero's rash promise to help the struggling city. They needed to get a ship and probably a crew. According to the information they had collected at the catacombs, they would need to cross the sea and travel to northern Tyrybhz. However, sea travel was currently unthinkable for the harbor city. Chimerical sea trade was suspended because of the dangers. This only left asking the Lord for a crew, a ship, and probably the permission to leave the harbor. The first person they met was the Lord's advisor who had hurriedly come out to greet Ahmed after he got the news. They waited for Ahmed to make his report. "We cannot expect any help from there. Nobody will come," he ended the report. Listening to Ahmed's story, reminded the party again, of how grave the rise of the Blood Sun was. None of them knew that all his comrades fell during the siege on the catacombs when they helped protect the populated floors. The advisor's face fell when he heard the bad news, but he pulled himself together. He couldn't show weakness in front of guests. It was unprofessional. "It's great you made it back. Was it thanks to these people?" "Yes, they are visitors from another world and might be able to help us. I managed to return thanks to them." "Visitors from another world?" the advisor asked, shocked. Ahmed repeated what they had told him, about the motives in coming to this world and the hero's promise to help them. The advisor did not trust them as readily as Ahmed had, after the influence of Seth's voice. Still, they were in a desperate situation and didn't have much of a choice. After listening to them for a while, the advisor finally brought them to the city lord. Only he could make the final decision. They didn't meet the lord in a grand throne room or a luxurious office. The middle-aged man, with a black beard and long hair, was covered in sweat and working on a field, in a kind of greenhouse. A framework of rods, covered by a thick, light-tight fabric. Inside the fabric was tightly packed in magic runes that illuminated the field. Although they were different from what he had learned, Seth's experience told him roughly what these runes did. There were arrays that recreated sunlight, some strengthened the aura of the earth and water to facilitate plant growth, others gathered magic to power the greenhouse. There were other figures in robes, tending to the fabric and taking notes. The field was filled with small green sprouts. The first normal green plant life they got to see in this world. "Ahmed! You are back! It's great you made it," the Lord greeted the knight happily. But no matter how happy he was about the knight's return, his expression turned stern when he heard the news. He was also skeptical about the party from Earth. They had changed locations to a drawing room, where they could talk in peace. "So, you want to help us in exchange for a ship with a crew to cross over to Tyrybhz?" he mused, speaking more to himself than to them, after hearing the whole story from Ahmed and the hero. "I can't give you a crew. I won't force any of my sailors to traverse those waters ever again," he said with a serious face. "Then how about several ships?" the merchant suddenly spoke out of turn. "Hubert?" Harker asked, surprised. The hero had insisted that it was his role as the leader, to negotiate with the Lord. He only looked at the merchant peeved, but he let it go as it seemed like the merchant had a motive. Several ships, but no crew? What would you gain from that? That would be our problem. The merchant did not comment any further. I heard you are strong, but that's not enough to earn a ship. Would you give us a moment to draft our proposal? The merchant asked. The Lord looked at the older gentleman for a moment, before nodding. He left them alone in the drawing room. Chapter 424. The Deal. Hubert McCarthy, the Dimensional Merchant. Seth had forgotten his name right after they introduced themselves at the start of their journey. He only remembered it when the hero called him that. I know, everyone here has their secrets and skills they don't wish to reveal. However, we were plunged into this situation together and should share information. Does any of you have any skills that could be of value in our current situation? The Dimensional Merchant began. I will start off by explaining what I can do in my plan. As a dimensional merchant, I have access to a multidimensional trade and auction system. Unfortunately, it had its own internal currency, and the system coins are unable to be converted. Right now, I can only sell things to gain the currency or barter them. The reason I asked for several ships, is because I am fairly certain that I could exchange them for a magical vessel. Then we would not need a crew to man the ship. Hubert explained. Everyone nodded. If the merchant could really purchase something like that, it would solve their problems. The question was how to make the Lord think it's worth it. Ben Harker would never agree to just steal the ships. They had to help anyway since they had to wait for the next blood sun to pass before setting off. Getting surprised by the cursed celestial body in the middle of the ocean was not preferable. Even if they were no heroes like Ben, if the city fell before the blood sun was over, they would be in deep shit. I could offer to buy rations for the city from the system, but I'm not sure whether that would be enough since it will have a price after all, the merchant continued. Ellie suddenly leaned over to him and whispered in his ear. I could release my slimes to clean up the moat and the corpses. Should I? Seth thought for a moment. It was true, as a slime rancher, Ellie was able to bring all her slimes with her in her pet space. Actually, her elemental punches and kicks in melee combat were all skills based on the strength and element of the slime that enveloped her fist or legs. But this melee prowess was just her hiding her real power, to summon armies of slimes into battle. Similar to some necromancers, her class was all about growing and strengthening her troops. She just needed to put in a little more work, than just killing and resurrecting things. It's a good idea, but don't use them all at once. Try using a fraction and cycle them. You mean, so nobody sees the full number at once? That's genius. Stop joking. Let's go with that. While they were whispering, others had proposed their way of helping. The hero and Rich would be most useful in the Battle of the Blood Sun. If the slave mancer managed to contract all defenders, he could simultaneously improve their power. Similarly, the Saintess, Elsa, Brock, and Marcel could only offer their fighting prowess. Cade suggested putting an illusion on the city lord to simply hand the ships over, which led to a severe scolding by the incensed hero. I could summon my slimes to clean the moat and the city. Ellie interrupted the hero's tirade about justice and the abuse of power. It did not gather much attention from the others and the merchant simply noted it down. Seth did not speak up. He could use earth magic to strengthen the wall, but it was not something he wanted to reveal, yet. He thought about doing it secretly without revealing it. After they had gathered everything and compiled it into a proposal, they went to meet the Lord. You can summon slimes? Lord Hez asked excitedly. Against their expectations, it was the small and dismissed footnote of trash and corpse removal, that garnered the Lord's strong interest. Yes. Ellie answered unsettled at the Lord's sudden change. That's phenomenal. Forget 2 ships, I will give you 4 if you can clean up that disgusting moat and leave some slimes behind. Hez later explained after calming down. The moat had been a blessing and a curse. They had dug it to further strengthen their defense and it worked wonderfully at first. But as the moat filled and got defiled by the corpses of waves after waves of abominations, it became an unexpected hurdle. It wasn't just the stench pressing on the mood of the whole population, causing stress and aggression. The water became so toxic, that workers that entered to repair the walls and foundation, would become sick. Even small cuts would become inflamed and soon lead to severe sepsis. The moat was not the only problem. Without any precipitation, the canalization of the city did not work, and they were literally drowning in their own shit. So much so, that the citizens started doing their business into the sea or over the wall, into the moat. It was disgusting. As such, Ellie was like the angel of salvation to the city lord, who had to deal with more and worse than just hordes of monsters sieging them and food shortages plaguing the populace. Ellie puffed up her humble chest in pride, seeing how her powers were the most sought after. Especially, after she felt that the others had looked down on the power of slimes. Of course, the Lord was also glad to purchase supplies from the dimensional merchant, although it was not the most pressing issue. They had already seen that they had managed to develop measures to deal with their food shortage. As for the slavemancer's offer, the Lord accepted it, after taking a look at the contract. Rich could even put in the clause, that the Lord's or the army captain's orders were above his. The slavemancer was really happy to finally get a chance to shine, as none of his own team members were willing to become his slaves. Once the negotiations concluded, the group split up. It was only a matter of days before the blood sun would rise. Misto ran off to meet the Cloud Demon, whom he suspected to be of his own tribe. Rich went to the army barracks to get slaves. The merchant stayed with the Lord, as they looked for stuff to exchange for supplies. The people only useful for battle were free to do whatever, while Seth followed Ellie to the moat. They were accompanied by a messenger who would inform the people of the slime rancher's task. It was quite the sight when Ellie got serious. She waved her hand and an army of slimes of many different colors appeared on the field with the still smoking piles of burned corpses. Hundreds of slimes filled the area in front of the city gate. "Didn't we talk about using only a fraction?" Seth asked, surprised. "But this is just a fraction. About 1/5 of all I have. And they are just the ones with lower aptitude I don't use for breeding anymore," she answered nonchalantly. The colorful jelly balls got to work. They started to dissolve the cadaver piles and flooded over the edge into the moat. Even the earth they traversed was left clean, without any plants, blood, goo, or corpse wax left. "It won't be a big loss if I leave some of them to keep the moat and canalization clean," she added. Even if she downplayed the slime's performance. As Seth watched, he was sure, they all were leagues above ordinary wild slimes. They dissolved the rotten flesh and bones in the moat at a visible speed. It was so captivating, that Seth almost forgot about using his giant's rod on the wall. He made the recorders look away as he pulled out his legendary rod. "What are you doing? Is that a spear?" Ellie asked curiously. "Yes, and a staff. I'm using earth magic to reinforce the walls a little bit." But he indicated to keep it a secret. His earth magic had reached adept level 2 and his earth affinity had become level 6 during his training. The wall was already reinforced by professional mages, but he could still add a little bit thanks to his legendary rod. Under the attack of the slime army, the water of the moat soon started to turn clear, and the putrid stench weakened to the relief of everyone. After walking along the full length of the wall, Ellie entered the city, to take care of the canalization. Seth on the other hand leisurely went around inside the wall and sneakily reinforced it every time the recorder looked away. There were surprisingly few people close to the wall. It seemed that many houses were deserted. Had that many died during the last blood sun? They were just idle thoughts, as he walked around and finished his work. When he finished, it was evening. Tomorrow, just a few hours later, the blood sun would rise. Chapter 425. Blood Sun, First Wave. The ringing of bells woke Seth up. It was the alarm of the city. There were only another 30 minutes until sunrise. It was the signal for the soldiers to assemble and the citizens to hide in the shelters. Seth wore his armor and robe before stepping outside. Streams of people were hurrying past him to the shelter entrances. Then tension was almost tangible in the atmosphere of the city. He met Ellie, who also exited her room, and they walked to the city wall where the team planned to assemble. The air was thick with the nervousness and fear of the soldiers, who did their best to stay still in frightened anticipation of what was to come. The time of sunrise came and Seth was not sure what he had expected. It was not this. There was no dawn. No slowly rising sun or rays that greeted the morning. Night switched to doomsday without any warning. The world in the distance turned into shades of red as the blood sun suddenly illuminated the world with ferocious intensity. Any other color that dared to sprout past the field of clouds was burned away. Even the thick clouds above their head were not enough to completely block the solar wrath. The dark city was submerged into a red hue, with crimson rays, like spotlights breaking, through the cloud cover above. Seth had no doubt that this aligned with the very definition of Judgment Day. The soldiers on the wall were plunged into maroon highlights and shadows the color of dried blood. Gripping their weapons tight, they stared at the horizon. Soon came the sound. The crushing of waves? The rumbling of thunder? No, Crimson dust clouds appeared at the horizon, rushing at the citadel of darkness that was resisting the sun god's blessing. Too far to make out with normal eyes, the blacksmith could make out the flood of monstrous flesh flooding across the plain, filling the horizon. He almost regretted wearing the Eye of Argos today, the sight he suffered was horrible. Under the cursing light of the blood sun, there was no individual monster in this stampede. The flesh on their bones kept melting under the god's power and reassembling with other creatures, as they ran towards their destination. It was really a wave of raving, liquid bodies that poured towards them. "Are you okay? You look pale, Seth," Ellie asked from the side. Seth could only nod slightly, as he watched the horror unfold. He wasn't good with this kind of body horror but managed thanks to calm reaction cushioning the impact. "Ellie, I believe you should add some more slimes to the moat. This might get very ugly." The wave entered the shadows of the cloud field. At first, there was no change, but as they got closer and the power of the blood sun weakened, the undulation came to a hold. Still far outside of a normal person's range of sight, amalgamations solidified from the raving mass of meat and bones. Their skins were like molten wax and covered in the cancerous lumps that acted as armor. The army rushing toward the city had no small fries. Each amalgamation was of massive size, with the smallest being comparable if not stronger, than the field boss they met. However, the first move was not theirs, and not from the soldiers of the walls. As they were close enough to be seen with the regular eye, they had also entered the range of the black clouds. The thunder of the stampede that had tortured their ears and shaken their heart, was suddenly drowned out by the rumble of the clouds above. As if provoked, real thunder reared its head and bright flashes of light illuminated the darkness. Lightning thick as houses started raining down, covering the world in blinding light and ear-shattering roars. Looking up, Seth found Mistopheles and a similar-looking demon at the balcony of a guard tower. It almost seemed like a dance, as the older demon moves and Pheles mirrored his movements. Every time there was a slight pause in their movements, lightning struck, and thunder drowned the world. Wherever their attacks hit, they only left craters of scorched earth behind. Nothing remained of the monsters they hit. The clouds were not just protection from the sun, but also the foundation of this first line of defense. The second would have been a field of traps, but the city had lacked the manpower to fix it in time. Under the bombardment of lightning, the amalgamations reached the outer barrier, where the cloud's fire intensified before finally dying down. Looking towards the tower, Seth saw the two demons gasping for breath. That was probably it for now. It was obvious, they couldn't keep up that bombardment for long. Still, the biggest amalgamations had been mowed down by the lightning, leaving the terrifying enemy army with maybe half its original strength. When the lightning died down, the magician took aim at the beasts, that were occupied with breaking the outer barrier. Flashy spells started raining down at the defenseless foes. The people of Ahas tried their best to kill as many as they could because everyone knew, the barrier was only here to buy time. However, their time was shorter than expected. From far behind the front line, came a giant beast. Head and shoulders far above the rest of the amalgamations, a giant mammoth came charging at the barrier. It had come late and managed to evade the lightning rain, that had reaped anything comparable in size and strength. Trampling over its allies that were left, it crashed into the barrier. It held for a moment, a short moment of hope, before immediately shattering. In shock, they watched the barrier break way too early. On the wall, Seth heard the commanders scream orders and the soldiers hurriedly got into position. The magicians in the towers did their best to thin out the herd, as the archers joined with their arrows and skills. Seth couldn't help but recognize, that these people were a lot stronger in general, than their counterparts on Earth. Not level-wise or class-wise. It was only a short distraction, as he did not have the time to split his focus in this kind of situation. He made the recorder look away, before joining the archers. It had been a while since he used his bow. But it was not the same bow as before. After gaining the ability, Seth had strengthened and refined the vengeful soul of the bow. Its name changed to Mind Reaper, and besides the chance to cause damage to the opponent's soul, it gained the active skill Life Reaper. An unaimed arrow would automatically aim for the best possible target to achieve an immediate kill. It was no guaranteed kill, but every minute when the cooldown was over, Seth could simply shoot an arrow that would at least cause tremendous damage. Since the arrows were provided, the blacksmith began to display his skill in rapidly firing low-quality arrows. The next line of defense, after the outer barrier was broken, was the secondary barrier, followed by the moat and the main barrier that protected the city wall. As the amalgamations made their way to the secondary barrier, everyone furiously aimed at the giant mammoth. If this thing managed to reach the barrier, it would be gone just as quickly as the outer one. Under the combined fire of the magic towers and archers, the mammoth was obliterated. It was almost overkill. Their relief, however, was of short duration. Nobody knew how, or why, but when the wave finally reached the secondary barrier right outside the moat, it shattered almost instantly. They could only watch in disbelief as the army of monsters, ranging between 6 to 10 meters in height, started jumping into the moat to reach their last line of defense. Mind Reaper. Unique. Damage, 750. Durability, 2600. One arrow's shot with this bow show great malice and will aim to hit vital points. 2 inflicted wounds will cause terrifying pain, won't heal naturally but start decaying, have a high chance of infection and poisoning. 360% chance to cause mind disruption on hit, effects, stun/confusion/terror. 520% chance to cause mind decay on hit. 610% chance to cause soul decay. 7 active skill, Life Reaper. A terrifying weapon made by the devious hands of Journeyman Smith. A bow possessed by a malicious will to hurt its benefactor's enemies and torment them. If someone other tries to use this bow, they will be hit by the curse of decay in body and mind. Usage requirements: Seth Smith, 90 strength. Chapter 426. Blood Sun, First Wave, 2. Seth. It's that one. Stop him. He's killing my babies. Ellie suddenly tucked his sleeve and screamed over the noise of the battle. With tears and vengeance in her eyes, she pointed down in the moat. In the moat below, was another war raging, slimes frantically trying to envelop and digest the still living beasts that had entered their wet territory. Most of the beasts were simply too clumsy in the water to offer any significant resistance to the gooey undertakers. Seth immediately recognized which one she meant. The amalgamation was small, just around 4 meters, but had a terrifying aura. As he looked, it ripped apart one of the slims, as if it was made of papier-mâché. Carbonized amalgamation Leave 87. It looked slender and humanoid, with its body burned black like charcoal. This had to be the thing that destroyed the secondary barrier, under the cover of the other, bigger amalgamations. They had to stop it from reaching the city barrier and the wall. Seth knocked an arrow and lit the tip with his pale spirit flame. He aimed and shot at the monster, as it was occupied with ripping apart the slime. The arrow left the string and led by the bow's malicious will, it directly aimed for the carbonized amalgamation's raised head. In the last possible moment, the beast threw its head back, causing the arrow to penetrate its collar. It let out a high-pitched scream that penetrated into the onlooker's soul as the bluish flame started burning its shoulder and neck. Still, the beast seemed to have a high resistance to fire, as expected of something blessed by the sun god. Using voice of Seth, the blacksmith's voice penetrated the battle noise. "Harker, it's that one burning in the moat. Don't let it reach the wall," he screamed for the hero to hear. If someone had the power to kill the beast in time, it was that guy. Of course, the hero was not the only one who harmed him, and many people aimed their ranged attacks against the carbonized creature. Seth's guess quickly proved to be true, as their attacks only slowed it down, but couldn't end its life. Could another team member do it? Maybe, but the hero had already shown his power on stream. It was best to throw him out there. Harker had been at another part of the wall when he heard the bard's call. He did come rushing over, and it seemed that he immediately understood the situation, when he saw what everyone was aiming for. He climbed on the battlements, took a stance, and readied his sword. Seth made sure that the recorders he could influence got that scene. Harker's sword started glowing in a bright, holy light. Looking like a white laser, he swung it and sent off a blade of light. This was no fancy skill. Anyone who learned energy circulation could send off energy blades. Even Seth. But this was the energy blade of a hero, and its power was hard to fathom to the onlooker. At least until it hit the amalgamation. The blade was so fast, that it almost looked like a beam, and the creature, no other attack had been able to stop, was cut apart at the waist. Then the profoundness of the skill showed in its effect. It was not only cut at the waist but also along the body, in several diagonals. The outcome was that the deep black, carbonized amalgamation was cut into several dozens, still falling pieces, by the one energy blade he shot. Seth was sure, this was what a serious attack from the hero looked like. Even Harker had been holding back until now. The death of the carbonized amalgamation was the beginning of the end, for this first wave. None of the amalgamations below could break the city barrier. They were stuck in the moat and ground down between the onslaught of slimes and the attacks from the wall. Seeing the slime rancher stare into the moat, he patted her shoulder. Ellie, I'm sorry that so many of your slimes died. Oh, don't worry, look, they are already recovering their numbers. Looking at the moat, Seth could see the slimes making quick work of the bodies floating below. The monsters had grown and proceeded to split. More and more slimes split into two, doubling their numbers. Now there were even more slimes than before. What a waste! How can you do this to the great me? Making this me watch such delicious food being wasted on slimes. The Ivisor whined. Let me join, too. Okay, how about on the next wave or something? After this first wave calmed down, the drawbridge was lowered. Teams of soldiers and mages left the city to reinstall the secondary barriers. Nobody actually knew how many waves there would be, or the intervals. Seth had heard from the acting commander that the highest number of waves during a blood sun was 7, which was the last time. It had been the last of those waves that had almost torn down the city walls. They knew only one thing for sure, the waves would grow incrementally stronger. Losing the first 2 barriers this early was a bad omen for the rest of the day. Using the break, Seth visited the field kitchen, where the soldier could come to get food, water, and rest. Sitting on the benches he found Felice and who he presumed to be Lord Culus. They didn't look good. Is everything okay? He asked and stepped up to the duo. Oh, Seth. Lord Culus, this is Seth, our bard. Don't worry, we just overexerted ourselves a little. Hello, young one. I heard you were a demon bard. Why didn't you sing during the wave? I heard this is just the beginning. I wanted to keep some cards up my sleeve. I don't think I am the only one. Seth answered, hinting at others holding back, too. The hero for example. Over the past months, Seth had learned quite a few more stable songs from Ounce. They were more in line with the bardic element of his job than with the crafting part. Demonic smithing ballads heavily relied on calling upon the blessing of specific high-ranking demons and devils. However, the more bardic songs relied on the skill as a musician and less on channeling the whimsical power of a demonic sugar daddy. They were a lot more stable in their performance, especially together with Orpheus' voice and voice of Seth. However, they also cost more mana and mental energy in general. Some even drew their power from those listening, but those were few and not in line with strengthening others. Because of that, Seth made sure to pace himself. Haha, well said. I like your way of thinking. If I could, I would have done the same, the old demon chuckled. They started a conversation while eating. According to the old demon, this first wave had been the strongest he had seen. Despite holding back nothing, he had not managed to save the outer and secondary barrier. But you are a demon, couldn't you just leave if things got dicey? Seth asked when their conversation turned to the reason why the demon was trying so hard. I signed a contract, the old man sighed. Demons always fulfill their contracts, Misto interjected. It's just that I underestimated the work I had to put in, Culus said helplessly. We can only hope the next waves don't get worse. Misto lamented. After finishing his meal, Seth got up to look for the 3 stooges, Marcel, Elsa, and Brock. Seeing the demons in charge of thinning the herd already tired, didn't give him a lot of confidence for the day. The 3 were strong, but they were not as over the top as the others. It would be better he had them by his side if things went haywire. On the way, he ran into Rich, who was talking to a bunch of soldiers. The slave mancer was at a different part of the wall to space out their supporters. Even his powers as the most powerful supporter had their limits and couldn't support all warriors on the wall. The blacksmith thought for a moment before deciding to give the slave mancer a warning. Rich. The slave mancer twitched in shock before he slowly turned around. Although they had gotten along well when Rich bought equipment and spent months to pay it off, he knew very well that he messed up when he followed the dumb hero in ambushing Seth's friends at the banquet. Why yes, Seth. It was true, Seth didn't have the best opinion of him, but it didn't mean he would withhold a warning that could save his life. Don't worry. I just came to caution you. It looks like this time's blood sun might be worse than what we heard about. The demons might reach their limit at some point. Just, stay vigilant and don't hold back when stuff is going down. Rich blinked while processing what he just heard. Ah, yes. Okay. Thank you, said confused, but Seth already continued looking for the 3. They were not part of Minas Mar, but because of his previous experience, Seth considered them reliable. Even trustworthy. He wouldn't want them to be swept up in something. He found the three sitting at another field kitchen at a different part of the city wall. Seth. What brings you here? Marcel greeted him after swallowing a mouth of soup. You three, follow me to my part of the wall. What about our stationing? Didn't we plan it out with the Lord? Brock argued, but Seth interrupted him. Listen, I have a bad feeling about this. I want you three in a place I can have an eye on. Look here, just because you have a hunch, we... Drop it, Brock. We are coming. Marcel stopped him. He and Elsa had already stood up to follow the blacksmith. What are you doing? Are you really going just because? Brock, I will give you a piece of good advice. Listen to this man's hunches. We are going. The monk hesitated for a moment before he also stood up to follow Seth to his part of the wall. They reached the wall just in time. The alarm for the second wave was ringing and the teams that had reinstated the secondary barrier rushed back into the city. Chapter 427. Blood Sun, the wave. It had been little more than an hour since the last wave before the next appeared on the horizon. Seth had learned his lesson and did not use his pendant skill to look at the wave in the distance. To the relief of many, the second wave was tremendously weaker than the first. The lightning, though weaker, managed to strike down the humongous amalgamations before they reached the freshly erected secondary barrier. The shield held up and they were able to wipe out the second wave with ranged attacks. The terrifying first wave was like a dream. I was to the point that Seth saw no reason to let Puffles out. See, nothing bad happened, Brock commented at Seth's hunch after the last beast fell. The day is far from over. The blacksmith stated. He stared in the red abyss past the clouds and his feeling kept growing worse. Seeing the otherwise jolly bard this grim, made the monk shut up. After all, he was right. It was still late morning, not even noon. You guys wait here, I have to go talk with someone, Seth said and left the wall. He had to ask around and finally found Hubert at the harbor. The ocean breeze was a nice refreshment, compared to the stench of sweat and fear on the walls. The dimensional merchant looked up and smiled when he recognized who it was. You feel it too, right? The gentleman asked with a smile. It was obvious what he meant, the merchant probably had a similar skill to Seth or an item. Right, something is brewing. Are you ready? Almost, I already sold 3 of the 5 ships the Lord transferred to me. I should have enough for a magic vessel after selling the 4th, the older gentleman answered. Seth only nodded. Although they didn't really know each other, this short conversation was enough to make sure their intentions aligned. Lastly, he found the Saintess and the Cade. He wanted to warn both of them and make sure they were on board. However, his concerns were not necessary. Both had a similar intuition and did not disagree with being cautious. The third wave was inbound, and it was no weaker than the first. Once again, the army of flesh was met by a field of lightning. But the observer couldn't help but notice that the cloud fire had grown weaker than before. While it still felled Beast Tower over 50m tall, the corpses would pile up on the battlefield. Some even needed several strikes to finally die. A huge number of overwhelming amalgamations reached the secondary barrier and ripped through it as if it was wet rice paper. As the secondary barrier gave in, an unearthly screech echoed across the battlefield and the secondary barrier was replaced by a grey field of light and a golden wall. At the same time, a creature of nightmares appeared in the skies. A giant being the length of dozens of carriages was flying over the battlefield. Like an insect, maybe a centipede, but with a shell white like jade and golden runes all across the long boy. The 3 pairs of blue eyes glowed, and it spat a ray of concentrated golden light. The attack cleanly dissected several amalgamations. Not just the soldiers of Ahaz, even the team member from Earth looked at the beats in shock. Did Puffles grow again? The swordman, Marcel, uttered, but there was no answer. The person he asked was busy singing a song in a language they could not understand, but it transmitted a foreign power to everyone directly listening. Hundreds of soldiers in the walls surrounding the bard were enveloped in a red haze, as their attacks became more frantic and powerful. If this is how we play, then the blonde Saintess, Yvette, could be heard. The woman that had cast the grey field of light, that slowed the ugly foes to the point of slow motion, also summoned a creature. As the horror of the sky dove down, strangling one of the biggest amalgamations, and straight up ripping its head off, a giant sloth entered the battlefield. The pet of the Saintess, though many times less impressive than the oversized nightmare fuel, also entered melee battle. Massive claws cut the amalgamations it squared up against, partly petrifying and slowing them. While the sloth was fighting, and the horror wreaked havoc, silently a jinn had also entered the arena, summoning sandstorms that ground the meat off the slowed enemy's bones. While others sent their pets and familiars to thin the herd, the hero had directly jumped down from the wall and entered the battle. Similar to the centipede's laser, the hero's energy blade sliced apart the giant monsters that posed a threat to the last barrier. While the jinn, the sloth, and the hero returned once the threats to the barriers were gone, the centipede stayed. There was nothing on the field that could harm the armored train, as it rushed across the land and voraciously swallowed the sun-cursed fodder. The secondary barrier held as the third wave fell to ranged fire and a hungry caterpillar. These were the scenes a merman was watching from his sofa in his living room, in a mansion at the center of Krna. The pickles had fallen off his face and the cream of his face mask had long dried up. This is the power of Delta. Prince Moor mumbled to himself. He sat in a room with many different screens, where he had the perspectives of every member of the Erdhan team. After the Crown Prince took over the businesses on Earth, Moor had gladly thrown away the responsibility and went on a trip to Krna. At the time, he had not known that Earth would take part in this time's evaluation. However, Moor was sure that the elders would throw him back into Earth the moment the Crown Prince messed up. This was a good preparation for when the time came. He was definitely not sitting in this room full of screens, with fin curls and a bowl of snacks, because he was a total sucker for reality TV. He wasn't. The other screens that showed every perspective of every team member of the other teams were also for research. Just in case he was sent to a different world. In another, less expensive, place in Krna, Sean's heart was about to pop out of his chest. He had not been this happy in a long time. The Blood Sun was a great event and the ratings shot to the sky all across the board. The whole empire was glued to their screens watching the evaluation teams struggle for survival in this terrifying cataclysm. However, of all parties currently in Kavati Koinan, the one from Earth was the most interesting. They were the only ones who had not only found survivors but also joined a full-on city siege. And he, Sean, had secured the broadcasts right for several members of this team. Their channel was thriving with the highest quotes, even greater than those of the Imperial Stream. While the Slime Ranger was already an interesting character, the otherwise plain Bard also finally got into action. Who would have thought his pet was several times more impressive than the man himself? Culus stood on his tower and looked at the horizon. The old demon gritted his teeth. Who would have thought the waves would be this overwhelming? Had a city somewhere else fallen, giving way for more hordes to stream to Ahaz? The power of the foreigner was also surprising. Was he also hiding something? He had not felt any overwhelming talent from this whelp. There was nothing suspicious as he directed the power of the cloud furnace with the young demon that came along with the foreigners. The cloud furnace was a formation that not only gathered clouds but also stored their power. Then it only needed operators to guide the stored power into spells. It was straining and hard work to direct such immense masses of energy, but the resulting damage was far higher than any regular spell a single being of their standing could cast. But now, things looked bleak. They had already depleted 3/4 of the power stored in the cloud furnace. It was early noon, and this had only been the third wave. He pushed away these distracting thoughts. That's right. If worse came to worst, there was still that method. He would have to talk with the Lord and inform the leaders. If their chances looked bleak, there might be one last time the foreigners could help them. Chapter 428. Somewhere else, 11. A rain of light hammered down onto the elite beast, punching holes through the tough body armor. As expected of the warrior nun. Wow! The rest of the raiding party was gushing in awe. The person in question still felt awkward hearing people react like this, but she couldn't say that it was unpleasant. A little more than 2 months ago, she had to face a decision. She had denied a chance of a comfortable lazy life and even left behind an easy way to grow stronger. She had chosen to try and stand on her own 2 legs. When Seth gave her the choice, she chose to leave. She was living with Serena, a young noble lady the blacksmith had met at the start of his journey. The girl's father was the lord of a not-so-small city on the eastern coast of Nemea. A raid of almost 30 adventurers had been sieging 3 elite armor beasts in the plaza. They were at the front of the 25th level's boss room of a newly discovered dungeon. Starting off as an adventurer in a foreign land was not the easiest thing she had done in her life, but also not the hardest. She had some financial backing from Serena's father who took her in upon Seth's recommendation. Her class, Priestess of the Fount, had also opened a few doors for her, but she had not only relied on her rare class. The Priestess of the Fount had healing skills on par with a high priest, but she also trained hard to master staff arts and often fought in the front line. Her resolute personality and discipline she showed during hunts had earned her the title of warrior nun. As a promising rookie, she had managed to quickly make a name for herself. As impressive as it may sound, she was still a rookie, some levels off level 30. Another reason was that she would often be seen kneeling on the battlefield to activate her skills, with motions resembling devout prayer. With support, melee, and ranged magic skills, she was a balanced member of any party. However, she never joined any party for long. Serena's father guessed that the reason was her goal. After all, she wanted to become great enough to prove herself worthy of the system god's blessing and return to Earth. He couldn't know that this guess was actually far from true. Linri really wanted to find a party and start traveling the continent. She wanted to see what Seth saw and visit Aura at some point. She knew that her time in this city was limited. If she wanted to grow, she would have to leave. However, it was not because of some vague fear of separation that she had not joined any party yet. She wasn't some loner heroine that wanted to avoid personal connections because farewells were painful. There simply had not been a party worth investing in yet. The priestess was not interested in doing things half-heartedly. Linri wasn't just looking to join just any group to gain fame and power, but a party that was ready to come with her back to Earth and was fit to join Mina's march. This was on one hand her way of repaying Seth's favor, although this was her own selfish wish. On the other hand, it was her way to honor his promise. To enable her to live a free life and make her own choices. She wanted to gain happiness with her own friends and return to Minas Mar as a reliable addition to the place. This was her choice. Regrettably, she had not found any likable people, yet. Those who approached her did so mostly for their own interest. These relationships worked out for a few dungeon dives, but they were nothing reliable. Not the thing she was looking for. The priestess had internalized one of the foundations of Mina's march. Strength could be augmented with items and hard work. Trustworthiness was the most important. The young woman had not taken into account that it became hard to find trustworthy people once one became the center of attention. In the end, she resigned to bow her head to the Lord and ask for help. If she couldn't find a good party, she would have to make one herself. How would she find good adventurers? Well, obviously she needed information. Now she could have bought that, but unlike Mr. Moneybags Seth Smith she lacked the necessary funds or connections to do so. Linri could only fall back on borrowed relationships and ask the Lord for his help in the matter. It was getting time for the warrior nun to assemble her own party. Delta. The freezing cold could not yet reach the depth where Minas Mar was standing, but the city above was covered in thick snow and an unnatural cold. Delta was used to lower temperatures and harsh winters before the apocalypse. It was the activity of the volcano that had given them an almost summerly temperature all year round. The prices of warm clothes were on the rise. On that note, Minas Mar's investment in Nico Booz bore unprecedented fruits as he and Whedon could use much of the stored monster furs to fashion winter clothes. Monique was a lot more comfortable being the substitute tower master when she didn't have to deal with a terrible disaster. Still, she was suffering as she sat in her office plagued by paperwork. Monique, I have to talk with you about something. Suddenly entered the office. Evie's arrival was like the sun on a cloudy day, a chance to put away the cumbersome work. I might have an explanation for the drop in temperature, she said proudly. Many were looking for an explanation for the sudden winter. The most obvious explanation would have been that something was wrong with the volcano, which created the warm climate in the first place. But it wasn't the volcano suddenly calming down. The staff of the Empire had checked, and the fire mountain was as active as ever. All other explanations also fell short as nothing could be checked or proven. Evie had been in charge of the tower's operations, how would she know what caused the cold? Look here, the immortal witch said and put a stack of papers in her face. Monique grunted. Ugh, more paper. She lamented in her mind. It's the output from our mana gathering formations. We have been gathering more mana, despite not increasing the performance. Evie explained. What are you on about? Monique asked cluelessly. It means the mana density in the air has increased. Do you remember when Drosy explained about mana collecting? It can also change the climate and lower the temperature of a place. I think this is happening. Monique rubbed her eyes. But why would that happen? Are you sure? The people from the Empire would have definitely found something if it was something like that. It might be too little for them to notice right now. We have huge mana collectors. It's easier to find a small change, gradual change like this. I have been observing the change over the last few days and checked the data of the last weeks. The mana in the air is very slowly rising. The young woman showed Monique the statistics as proof. Okay, but what causes the rise in mana? The substitute tower master asked. I don't know. Evie shrugged. We should inform the Empire and see if they have an answer. No need. I have an answer, a third person suddenly interrupted. Still with some snowflakes on her shoulder, in clothes that became even more revealing from the cold, Alzalsar stepped into the office. It seemed that she had just ported back to Minas Mar from outside. Her face was locked in a displeased scowl. Al. You know what is going on? Yeah, some scoundrel set up something like a mana gather formation at one of the higher peaks of the mountain range. I can see it from the flow of mana, and with Evie data I have proof that it's crazily condensing huge amounts of energy. Why do you think there is someone behind this? Monique asked, disturbed. A change like this is not natural, not in such a short amount of time. Then we have to tell the Empire as soon as possible. Evie insisted. It might be too late. Until those dweebs checked our assumption and take action, the city above might be buried below a glacier. My little cuties are already freezing and wearing thick clothes. How am I to enjoy my off time like this? I can't accept such provocation. I will personally bring justice to the one responsible. Evie and Monique felt a little awkward. So this was the reason the great sorceress suddenly moved. Someone had messed with her business in the red light district. Arim, how about this? While you go and deal with the offender, Evie will inform the Empire officials about what is going on. Sounds good. Do whatever you want. I just came to inform you of my departure. I might be gone for a few days. With that, the sorceress left the office, followed by the stumped looks of the other two. Chapter 429. Blood Sun, The Wave, 2. The third wave had concluded. Puffles stayed on the field and kept gorging on the corpses of the abominations, while a team of magicians and soldiers ran out to reset the outer barrier. Seth's bad feeling had not gone away, so it was not about the third wave. At least the power some the team members had revealed reassured him. There were great abilities during the last battle. Still, he couldn't help but give the merchant another visit. It's done. Hubert greeted him, by immediately telling him the answer to his question. Seth halted for a moment, but nodded seriously, before leaving again. If he approached the merchant too often, it might seem like they were scheming something. Next, Seth wanted to convene with the Saintess and Kate again, however, the alarm sounded before he could find them. The fourth wave was already at the horizon. Tisk. He hurried back to the wall, where he met up with Ellie, Elsa, Marcel, and Brock. The rumble of the stampede even shook the wall. In a reflex, he used the power of his amulet to get a glimpse at the enemy. The blacksmith instantly regretted his action. When the first one was a wave, then this was a tsunami of yuckiness. On the tower above, the old and young demon started their dance once again, to greet the mass of horror with lightning. Puffles, who had satiated his hunger, was sprawled out like a lazy dragon behind the reinstated outer barrier. The Evisor was waiting for his victims. He wanted to get a good stockpile for the journey from here on. For Puffles, this was just a food-gathering quest. Kula stared at the horizon grimly. This was worse than he expected, but not hopeless. If the foreigner put as much effort into it as they did on the last wave, they might be able to get through this one. After 3 waves, his coordination with the young demon, Misto, had gotten a lot better. They directed the power of nature and blasted away many of the great amalgamations at ease. The wave had looked terrifying from afar. Upon entering the cloud cover, they turned out to be just looks and no essence. They looked mighty but were far weaker than those of the third wave. Kulis got his hopes up only for them to be crushed and the demon falling to the depths of despair but a moment later. All big amalgamations had fallen, but the outer barrier popped like a bubble anyway. The moment the bard's giant monster met the charging enemy, it suddenly vaporized a fan-shaped porting in front of it, before taking off and seeking shelter in the sky. What was happening? The demon only saw his worst nightmare, after the small fries were burned away from the centipede's beam attack. The freed field was dotted with small, black humanoids. From this distance, they were strikingly similar to the carbonized amalgamation. But they were smaller and more numerous. They had hidden among the big hunks. Since when did the wave involve such a strategy? Where did all those enemies even come from? His mind fell in disarray, as he faced this unreasonable turn of events. The current energy was not enough for the cloud furnace to burn all of those away. As for the foreigners? Culus looked down at the battlefield. The man called Ben Harker had already descended from the wall and attacked the creatures that were currently banging at the centipede's golden barrier. However, it was obvious that the barrier would not hold long. As they wiped away the amalgamations, only more carbonized humanoids were revealed between them. The other foreigners joined it, one by one revealing their hidden cards. The bard, the priestess, the slave-mancer were showing their power in buffing the army to unknown heights. And just like this, they kept fighting. 1 hour, 2 hours. Barriers would break, debuffs would be cast, barriers would be recast. Culus began to have hope again. Maybe. If they held up then. 3 hours, 4 hours, the beasts finally stood at the secondary barrier and broke through. No matter how strong someone was, at some point, they would grow tired. Dismayed, Culus found the frequency of the buffs lowering, their effects weakening. The power stored within the cloud furnace was almost depleted. They could have done it if the wave had just ended. Why wouldn't it end? Was this the sun god's answer to their resistance? Had he assembled all his lowly forces to squash them once and for all? No, he could accept it. They still had a chance. His gaze turned ruthless. Yes, there is still one last trump card. The old demon looked at the youngling at his side. He had to harden his heart, there was no other way from here on. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning almost struck Puffles in the sky. The hero too only barely managed to dodge a lightning strike. Seth looked up to the tower, only to see Culus stab Mistopheles in the back. The mist demon was unable to scream, or even made a move as his body turned to particles and was sucked into the clouds above. Dodge! Seth suddenly screamed. He immediately let go of the lyre and jumped aside himself. The lyre started floating beside him and changed its tune. Having cautioned time and time again, the people in his immediate vicinity reacted by randomly charging away from the place they had just been standing at. When he looked behind him, he saw at least 3 soldiers with a dagger in their hands and a driven look on their faces. Before he could do anything himself, someone else took action. Don't touch Mom! The emoji jumped out from the pet space and hit the surrounding soldiers with a freezing wave. The powerful ice magic he copied from Elsa froze everyone in place. Everyone, get over here! Seth shouted with the voice of Seth, while Ounce played a tune to further slow the enemy. Ellie, who was close by, had also dodged the sneak attack. Before joining Seth, she quickly commanded all her slimes to retreat, leaving the moat empty. When the 3 stooges joined them, Seth brought out his giant's rod and cast the Desert Storm. A terrifying wall of sand and wind surrounded the group, blocking all views. What are we going to do now? Brock asked, disturbed. Seeing the people of Ahaz suddenly betray them had rattled him quite a bit. Don't worry, I was not the only one with a bad premonition. Hubert already prepared an escape route. Seth explained overhurriedly, drawing a magic circle on the wall. What are you doing? Won't they get through this storm at some point? Ellie asked, also slightly panicked. I will blast them if they do. Tatzel proclaimed bravely. No worries, I have a plan, he said. In the next moment, everyone saw him drop a ball of glinting lights on the wall, in the middle of the formation. Seth also knew how to be ruthless. The crazed Culus saw his plan fail in a fit of rage. How were they supposed to get enough energy for the cloud furnace now? The young demon was far from enough. But as expected, he was much better than the ordinary citizens. If only they could have gotten the other in one shot, the cloud furnace might have completely filled. With a full cloud furnace, he could have. Shit! Even that useless slave-mancer managed to barely dodge the strike. No. Things were not over yet. They could still catch them. Right, even if some escaped, they could fill the rest with the commoners. Just 3 or 4 more could fill the cloud furnace by half. They could make up the rest with the people. Just 1/3 of the populace, and the Lord wouldn't agree to sacrifice more of the populace. Would he? Faced with death, he would agree. Why would he even ask for permission? This was also about his life. Yes, he would. Culus was caught up in his spiral of thoughts as in about to do some horrible irreparable things when he was interrupted by someone else doing horrible irreparable things. The rumble of thunder and the roaring of beasts joined a third sound. The breaking of stones and grinding of sand. Huge cracks ran all across the city wall, as a part of it, enveloped in a storm of sand, stood up. A giant of stone, mortar, and sand rose from the rubble of the city wall. Incredulous, the demon watched the being enveloped in a mantle of sand jump off into the city, leaving a great hole in the upper half of the city wall. Culus could only watch until his attention was caught by a terrifying screech. Looking to the sky, he saw in horror, that the giant nightmare centipede was charging at him. Was it coming for revenge? However, as he was still staring at the beast, he felt a stabbing pain in his chest. Looking down, he was a bloody claw emerging from his chest. "I never had a demon," was the last thing he heard. The old demon felt a pain in his neck for just a moment before the world went dark. Chapter 430. Golem Madness. This had to be what the blacksmith had talked about. The bad premonition had come true. She herself had dodged a lightning strike and several attempts to ambush her with these weird daggers. Incensed about the old demon's betrayal, she saw no reason to leave him be. Climbing the tower, she found the demon was distracted by the bard's giant pet and she used her chance to end him. Her fangs tore through the demon's nape, severing the head except for a thin strand of skin, still keeping it attached to the body. Bones and cartilage crunched as she chewed and swallowed her bite. It was her first time tasting demon and it tasted horrible. The Rakshasa girl spat out what was left in her mouth and looked down at the city. The centipede who had his kill stolen turned away and followed the massive sandstorm that was moving through the city. She could barely make out the massive golem, lumbering ahead towards the harbor. She also saw the priestess ride her giant sloth, following the sandstorm from a distance. The hero was occupied on the battlefield and showed no sign of retreat. There was no trace of the slave Manser. However, as she looked down at the scene of battle, the hole ripped into the city wall, the primary barrier flickering unstably, she watched the despair in the soldiers' eyes grow as they looked up to the tower, where she was still standing with the demon's almost decapitated corpse stuck to her arm. The death of Culus meant that their hope was gone. The cloud furnace had no operator, and their cloud cover would dissipate. Kate realized her mistake. Maybe the blacksmith had his reasons not to make a move against the demon? She had to hurry. The Rakshasa girl gave the hero one last look, before copying the saintess and following the sand cloud towards the harbor. She noticed crooked silhouettes in the wake of the golem. The citizens had evacuated to the shelters. Who were those? Despite the danger, she couldn't help her curiosity and got closer to take a look. As the sandstorm moved on, the figures became clearer. Made of cobblestones and bricks were creatures not too far from abominations in appearance. Congregations of humanoid and bestial heads and limbs stuck to humongous bodies of up to 5 meters in height. Intrigued, the Rakshasa watched these things, but they stood still, like statues. Was this the blacksmith's doing? She couldn't imagine what he was planning. Maybe she would have understood more if she stayed but decided to rather make her way to the harbor. Shit! You just ripped out a whole chunk of the wall. Aren't they done for? Ellie asked, equally excited and shocked. The group stood on the head of the moving colossus and could barely see the thing's shoulders. Everything else was hidden in the sandstorm. The golem's body was both, made up of whirling sand and bricks from the city wall. It was a pure application of golem artisan, as this kind of creation was far easier and faster than his golem knights. Although a lot less cost-effective. He had spent a big soul made up of at least 40 medium souls, to make this beast possible. Although they tried to kill us, isn't this a little much? Brock asked, concerned. The people had been desperate when they tried to betray them. Even if they were to hold a grudge, the civilians were innocent. They didn't just try. Misto is dead. Ellie corrected him. And so is the one who killed him. The citizens had nothing to do with it, Brock insisted. Geez, stop bickering. You make it sound like I condemned them all to death, just because a chunk is missing from the wall. There are only a few hours of the day left. As long as they stay in their shelters, the people will be fine. Look, I am even working on some measures to take care of the aftermath. Seth was not a monster. Using the formation on the golem's head, he kept producing golem souls from the souls he had collected from the battlefield. Under the cover of the storm, he spawned a small army of weird and unique golems. It was no perfect plan, as he didn't know how well they would work. The quick creation of golem soul was a perk of golem artisan, although the efficiency was horrible without complicated adjustments. On the way to the harbor, he burned through a third of the souls he had collected, leaving 100 golems with the instructions to protect the shelters during the blood sun. The group on the golem watched the smaller bizarre figures pop up behind them in bafflement. If the soldiers on the wall do their job, I'm sure Ahas won't fall today, which means they survived longer than they should have. They would have fallen during the third wave if we were not here. Seth explained as he kept making golems. Won't the cloud cover disperse, with the death of the demon? Marcel wondered, looking at the sky. I don't think he is dead. Although the lightning stopped, the clouds show no signs of weakening. I don't think that demon is truly dead, despite our cannibal girl biting his head off. Elsa mentioned her doubts and pointed at the sky. It was true, the cloud cover was dark and healthy. See, their chances are good. No need to worry, let's get out of here. Ellie concluded. Then we have to hurry even more before that demon gets back to throwing lightning at us. With the soldiers busy at the wall and the citizens in the shelters, the city was empty. The golem made its way to the harbor unhindered, except for the buildings crumbling left and right as it walked through the slightly too narrow streets. The rubble of the houses did not stay down for long before it would rise again as golem warriors. There were another 50 before they reached the harbor. Seth's sandstorm surrounding them had slowly calmed down as they neared the harbor, where they now saw Cade, Yvette and the merchant already waiting for them. Having died down, the sandstorm finally revealed the full figure of the golem. It was between 10 to 15 meters in height. Its body was not just made up of the materials of the wall, but also of a freely swirling cloud of sand, almost resembling a desert elemental. Its towering figure kneeled, so the passengers could jump off its head. Hubert, quick now! We have to get out of here. Seth called after a look at his map. What about the hero? The merchant asked. Right after finishing his question, a bolt of lightning aimed for them but was blocked by the golem's broad back. Hurry! The others are on the way. Seth urged him. What is that? Ellie asked, and she was not the only one muttering in surprise. Understanding the situation, the merchant had immediately brought out the magic vessel he had purchased from his dimensional shop, using the currency he made by selling the 4 ships. The lower half of the vessel looked like the streamlined body of a luxury yacht, while the upper half looked like the elongated dome of a zeppelin. The whole hull had a polished metallic hue. The airship floated about half a meter above the ground. A gate opened and a boarding ramp was lowered. I will explain later. Get in! Hubert exclaimed as he boarded the vessel first to start up the engines and control. The inside was as one would expect from a luxury yacht. It was a little narrow, but everything was made from expensive materials. There were several doors, but Seth ignored them and followed Hubert to the cockpit. Are you sure? The hero is on his way. Seth didn't answer and only pointed down at the street, where 2 figures just exited an alley and entered the docks. Is that our ride? Don't leave without us. Hurry, Mr. Harker, the slave mancer called. They were the hero bin Harker, holding Rich the wounded slave mancer in a princess carry. At the same time, the harbor was brightly lit by another bolt of lightning that was blocked by the golem. Will the lightning be a problem? Seth asked, concerned. It would be a shame if they were shot down right after setting off. It's okay, I thought of that. The ship is armored against magic and lightning. Okay, we are ready. I can start once everyone is on board. The moment the hero charged over and entered the ship with Rich, Hubert attempted to close the entrance, but Seth suddenly grabbed his shoulder and stopped him. Wait just another moment, he said, but his eyes were focused on something else in front of him. Okay, we can start. He changed his mind just a moment later. Slightly confused, the merchant shrugged and started the vessel. Its altitude rose and it got ready to fly off toward the open sea. Chapter 431. An ace. See, I told you he wouldn't hold back, Seth claimed triumphantly the moment the city wall started rising imbued with arcane life. The rest of the audience scoffed at him in disdain. When did he say it? Wasn't he the one whining about finally getting out of isolation only for his champion to lay low? Hades went as far as to decisively ignore the braggart and concentrate to appreciate the show. As the blacksmith on the screen started deploying modified souls and growing bizarrely shaped golems like weeds, Hermes could not help but lean forward. Say, don't they remind you an awful lot of your Spartoi? He spoke to Hephaestus in the seat in front of him. Hephaestus only nodded with a slight smile. Although it was never him who deployed the Spartoi, they were indeed his work. His dragon-tooth warriors worked a little differently, but the blacksmith god had made this connection months ago and it touched him. Back then, the founder of this unique class had been a talented dwarven master, but despite Hephaestus' offer, he had worked hard to become the champion of Hades. At the time, he had felt a little offended. But seeing how much work that person had put into a skill that attempted to copy some of his own works comforted the god of craftsmen. After all, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. The dwarf had chosen a different way but achieved a similar result with hard work. Likewise, Seth had not chosen the path Hephaestus would have wished for him, however, the god of craftsmen was probably the one who had enjoyed the last months the most. It made him happy that the little blacksmith still ended up learning the basics of automatons. But it wasn't all. He had worked continuously to improve his works and craft, bringing new elements into blacksmithing and reaching impressive results. Even going as far as to create a method of artificial reincarnation. Despite them not choosing him or his path, how could the god of craftsmen not appreciate the work and effort they put into their workmanship? It was a shame he had been unable to keep an eye out for that dwarf after he became the champion of Hades. Krna. Unlike the gods, the audience of Krna was confused to the max. Things seemed to be going well. There was a huge hype when the pets first appeared and easily solved the dicey situation. Nobody had expected the bard to have such a terrifying beast hidden up his sleeve. It was really gratifying for Lena to see Hardwig's face when he saw what kind of monster the plain bard pulled out of nowhere. Then things started falling apart without warning. One of the team members was suddenly killed. This caused a shock, that reminded them of the vanished team again. Was something broken with the Empire's technology? Champions were not supposed to be able to die during the evaluation. They were supposed to be transported back, before receiving a finishing blow. Lena and Hardwig were watching the live feed in shock. Furthermore, things kept going haywire and even the Imperial censors had a hard time piecing together what actually happened afterward. The reason, the recorders had caught almost none of the primary action after this. Whether they were looking into another direction, were blocked by sand, or were too far away, there was not enough information to really understand what had happened there. They could only use the other perspectives to infer what happened. The hooded girl evaded the sneak attack and managed to counter-kill the murderer. The Saintess also managed to flee and rode her pet to safety. From their perspectives, they knew that half the team vanished in a giant sandstorm. The slave Mancer almost lost his life to a similar sneak attack and was only saved because of the hero's sudden decision to rush back. Their perspectives were useless in finding out what exactly happened, they could only continue to cite the material and hope there would be an explanation. As for the audience, they got the heavily cut version which simply jumped most of these events and went straight to the team in their magic vessel. Bay of Ahaz. Lightning struck the vessel, but it simply ran along the hull and was redirected back to the ground without causing any damage. See, I told you. This is what you get when you purchase the highest quality. Hubert said smugly, as they made their escape from Ahaz. The lightning strikes came almost frantic for a moment but stopped altogether when they got too far away from the shore. No matter how much they wanted to feed them to the cloud furnace, it made no sense to waste energy, when they couldn't retrieve their bodies. They were still under the cover of the clouds but had entered the open sea. Setting the ship on autopilot, Seth and Hubert returned to the community room in the ship. Although most of them had not known the demon for long, the atmosphere was rather gloomy. Losing a comrade had hit all of them, but the hero was hit the hardest. Besides looking depressed, the hero also kept giving Rich the stink eye. "What's with you two?" Seth asked curiously. "Hadn't those two gotten along quite well until now?" "He lied to us about his ability," the hero broke out. The whole story was like this. Even if the slave Mancer relinquished all right to give the other commands, there was still a failsafe. In case Rich was in mortal danger, his strongest slave would rush over and save him, even against their will. Until they reached safety, he would have total control over the slave. On the other hand, Rich complained that the hero has actually planned to stay behind and protect the commoners. They were only here because the slave Mancer was able to order the hero to flee. Despite losing someone because of them, you wanted to stay behind? Cade asked coldly. "The commoners are innocent. I had to protect them," he claimed righteously. The Rakshasa girl only scowled at him. He had no idea about the darkness dwelling in the hearts of humanity. She really wished for him to fall flat on his face and realize how naive he was. "Don't talk like you are some Samaritan. Don't believe you would have considered staying without that quest," Rich said sarcastically. "That's not true. PFF, you said it yourself, when I asked why you want to stay back. You can't lie under absolute control." It came out that the power of the hero class scaled with virtue, an attribute Seth was familiar with because Tatzel had gained it, too. The hero would frequently get quests to help people would get virtue as a reward. "I would have still wanted to help, even without the quest," the hero insisted. "Anyway, we are all here now. Hubert, why did you get an airship? I thought we take the sea route." Yvette interjected and tried to change the topic amicably. Hubert got the cue and started explaining. He wanted to get a magic ship at first, but when he remembered the dangers Ahmed had talked about, The beasts that had picked off his men along the shore, he was not so sure about it anymore and looked into hybrid vehicles. The current vessel was fit to fly in the sky and swim in the ocean. The flight cost more energy, but the ship could recharge itself by absorbing magic from the environment. This was they could use it as a ship at normal times and flee to the skies if there were dangers in the water. He went on to brag about all kinds of features of the ship, but they were too tired to listen. Everyone wanted to get some rest and chose a room from those available on the ship. Seth excused himself and waited until he was alone in the room, then he checked his map again. "Now then, how long will you pretend to be dead?" he asked into the seemingly empty room. There was a short laugh and Mistopheles materialized from the water vapor in the air. It was really him. It made sense that he had a similar way to avoid death, as Culus had. "How did you know I was here?" "Trade secret," Seth answered. He saw no reason to tell the demon about the life detection effect of one of his earrings. This allowed him to see life signs on his map, in the same fashion as he had experienced it in Deltan. The demon sighed and sat on one of the chairs. "Fine, you got me. I wanted to stay hidden until I recovered enough for another decoy. I feel vulnerable otherwise." Maybe you should stay hidden even then. Although I might not be the only one with knowledge of your presence, it might be better to keep you as an ace." "An ace? Why?" Seth shrugged. "We don't know what might happen in the future. It's always good to have an ace." Chapter 432. Pushy Pursuit. The only people who were assured of the demon's survival, apart from Seth, was the Imperial family. They were sure their technology had not malfunctioned, and the demon just found a way to evade the recorder's detection. As for the audience of the Empire's broadcast, the Battle of Ahaz had an abrupt end that jumped from the third wave to the team traveling across the sea. Their group's action was once again overshadowed by what happened to other teams, as they tried to weather the Blood Sun. The party of the unfortunate Scout Hannigan, for example, was like watching a horror movie. They got stuck in the vicinity of a berth when the Blood Sun rose and one of their members led them into a cave to hide from the sun. When the mass of the monsters flooded from the city laid siege to their cave, the party was chased into a vast network of caves and tunnels. The situation became so dire, that no one of them could afford to hold back. Each battle was fit to be the season finale of a show, and there were 10 of them. Only 7 of their members managed to escape, while the rest were teleported back to the Empire in the last second. Even after the Blood Sun sunk, they were scattered in the huge, dark labyrinth, still filled with abominations and amalgamations. Other groups were in similarly terrifying situations, with one group almost being wiped out because they had no shelter. They were transported back before the curse could harm them. In the light of these situations, the public quickly lost interest in the inconsistencies of Seth's party. The only one vexed by this was the reality TV junkie Moore, the Merman Prince, and others like him. But it hit him especially since he was most interested in knowing more of Earth's group. Just when they started showing some of their abilities, they had hidden so far, the report cut to them, leaving Ahaz. At this point, Moore had already gotten news of the Crown Prince's setback. The failed assassination attempt and the loss of their bridgehead in Beta was a big hit. What made it worse, was that unidentified humanoids had wiped out what little troops were left in Theta. The bizarre thing was, that no bodies were left behind. On their return, the Crown Prince and his people only found signs of battle and pools of blood. Pictures from the surveillance magic had shown a humanoid shape, but one they had never seen before. Moore didn't have the closer description, but the fact itself that they destroyed and took away all people left in their base was unsettling. The elders had not yet moved to throw the burden back at Moore, but he was sure, it wouldn't be long anymore. He had already put the plan into motion, to take his setup with him, if he really was ordered to return. He had to keep an eye on the team of Earth. One thing was clear, after the first Blood Sun, their team stayed one of the most mysterious. Other people would probably realize this in time. "Get it back in the air!" Marcel screamed at Hubert as Elsa and Tatzel kept throwing ice magic into the ocean, freezing large patches of the sea. They had entered the sea when the ship's energy storage fell below 50% because they were afraid of the sea beast that Ahmed had spoken of. Their caution had quickly shown its worth when a head suddenly surfaced in the water close to them. Their vessel looked like a nutshell, compared to the gargantuan sea dweller. Its head resembled a crocodile with a cluster of armored eyes on its head, of which half were focused on their ship. With a jolt, the airship increased its speed and shot up in the air. Not without the beast attempting to follow them, as its body charged out of the water to swallow the vessel like a pill. Just the part that came out of the water was longer than Puffle's whole body. Compared to this beast, he became a caterpillar again. And they had no idea about how much longer this